You are missing out on Herman Melville's ability to comprehensively encapsulate a body of knowledge for a given profession, in this case, whaling, as well as his ability to explore the nobility of traditionally low characters in his novel, Moby Dick. Hello, this is Burley's Books, where is my mission to look at books in the light of Western tradition in order to understand the value that they hold for us today. In essence, how does this book help us to better understand ourselves, our community, our neighbors, and our relation to God? To begin, consider something that you're very passionate about. It could be painting, could be basketball, it could be any given passion, right? Imagine you're trying to explore that and explain that to a stranger, and they just have no idea what you're trying to talk about. Moreover, not only do they not understand, but they could care less because it is traditionally perceived as something very low and servile, right? This is the situation that Herman Melville finds himself in Moby Dick. And because of this, he has to not only bestow dignity on the profession and the people involved in whaling, but then also in a dialectical manner, which is anything but straightforward, he has to capture the essence of whaling and the whale through the people who have observed them the most, the whalers, as well as to develop a systematic knowledge of the species and understand the whale from an anatomical perspective as well. So all of these together, done through scientific observation, systematizing the species, subjective experience of the power of the whale, and their influence on the people that come into contact with them, help him to better show his reader the greatness of the whale and bestow dignity as well on the people that are doing the whaling itself. One of the first things that he does is he tries to dignify the business, and in a very interesting fashion. So, firstly, we have the chapter "The Advocate," in which Ishmael is starting to embark on his adventure with Queequeg, but he feels that he needs to take a digression, right? And so, in order to justify what he's doing, and he does this in a number of different ways. So, in the first place, he says, it may be deemed almost superfluous to establish the fact that among many people at large, the business of whaling is not accounted on a level with what are called the liberal professions. If a stranger were introduced into any miscellaneous metropolitan society, it would but slightly advance the general opinions of his merits, were he presented to the company as a harpooner, say, and if in emulation of the naval officers he would append the initials SWF, sperm whale fishery, to his visiting card, such a procedure would be deemed preeminently presuming and ridiculous. As if to say that if you were to add that, you say that you're a whaler on a business card, you would not be respected at all. However, he gives a list of reasons of why people should be respecting whalers. For example, he says that whalers are one of the first explorers. For many years past the whaler ship, for example, he says that for many years past, the whale ship has been the pioneers in ferreting out the remotest and least known parts of the world. She has explored seas and archipelagos which had no chart where Cook or Vancouver had ever sailed. If American and European men of war now peacefully ride in once savage harbors, Let them fire. Salute to the honor and the glory of the whale ship, which originally showed them the way and first interpreted between them and the savages. Right? And so here we see Melville attempting to dignify his profession by means of showing that they're explorers, right? They're not just these low-down, dirty men. They are pushing the boundary and the vanguard for what we are able to know as as a community, right? They also have famous authors. He goes through a list, and it's really funny the way that this is formatted. It has a question. And that is italicized, right? So the question is, the whale has no famous author, and whaling no famous chronicler, and then it goes a regular formatting. But right here he says, who wrote the first account of our Leviathan? Who but mighty Job? And who composed the first narrative of a whaling voyage? Who but no less than the prince than Alfred the Great, who with his own royal pen took down the words from other the Norwegian whale hunter of those times, and who pronounced our glowing elegy in Parliament, who but Edmund Burke? Then he goes on to talk about how whaling has, people that have done whaling have no royal blood in their veins, as if to say you need to be of high birth or of noble stature to be involved in the whaling industry. He says, no good blood in their veins? They have something better than royal blood here. The grandmother of Benjamin Franklin was Mary Morrill. Afterwards, by marriage, Mary Folger, one of the old settlers in Nantucket, and the ancestress to a long line of Folgers and harpooneers, all kith and kin to noble Benjamin, this day darting the barbed iron from one side of the world to the other. Whaling not respectable? Whaling is imperial. By old English statutory law, the whale is declared a royal fish. The whale never figured in any grand, imposing way. In one of the mighty triumphs given to Roman general upon his entering the world's capital, the bones of a whale brought all the way from the Syrian coast were the most conspicuous object in the assembled profession. No dignity in whaling, the dignity of our calling the very heavens attest. Cetus is a constellation in the south, no more. Drive down your hat into the presence of the Tsar and take it off to Queequeg. No more, I know a man in his lifetime has taken 350 whales. I account that man more honorable than that great captain of antiquity who boasted of taking as many walled downs. That is a man who is dying for people to respect his profession. And that is noble. So not only does it go through the profession itself, he goes through and talks about the people in general. No, he does this in a couple different ways. In the chapter on knights and squires, which directly follows this, he goes through, and I'm going to read a little bit of this. It talks about how we view typically whalers as well, and tries to correct that, right? And he does perhaps go a little bit far, but you have to, as I was saying, you have to give this man credit for trying to noble profession, which is seen as very low. Here it is on page 102 in the very next chapter. But were the coming narrative to reveal in any instance the complete abasement of poor Starbuck's fortitude, Starbuck being one of the first mates on the Quad, the whaling ship that Ishmael's going on. Scarce might I have the heart to write it, for it is a thing most sorrowful, nay shocking, to expose the fall of valor in the soul. Men may seem detestable as joint stock companies and nations. Knaves, fools, and murderers there may be. Men may have mean and meeker faces, but man the ideal is so noble and sparkling, such a grand and glowing creature that only in ignominious blemish in him all his fellows should run to throw their costliest robes. That immaculate manliness we feel within ourselves, so far within us that it remains intact, though all the outward character seem gone, bleeds with keenest anguish at the outdraped spectacle of valor ruined man, nor can piety itself at such a shameful sight completely stifle her upbraidings against the permitting stars. But this august dignity I treat of is not the dignity of kings and robes, but that abounding dignity which has no robed investiture. Thou shalt see it shining in the arm that wields a pick or drives a spike, that democratic dignity which on all hands radiates without end from God himself. The great God absolute, the center and circumference of all democracy, his omnipresence, our divine equality. If then, to meanest mariners and renegades and castaways, I shall hereafter ascribe high qualities though dark, weave round them tragic graces, if even the most mournful, perchance the most abased among them all, shall at times lift himself to the high exalted mounts, if I should touch that workman's arm with such ethereal light, if I shall spread a rainbow over his disastrous set of sun, then against all mortal critics bear me out in it. Thou just spirit of equality, which hast spread one royal mantle of humanity over all kind, bear me out in it, thou great democratic God, who didst not refuse the swart convict Bunyan, the pale poetic pearl, thou who didst close with doubly hammered leaves of finest gold the stumped poppered arm of old Cervantes, thou who didst pick up Andrew Jackson from the pebbles, who didst hurl him upon a war horse, who didst thunder him higher than a throne, thou who, in all thy mighty earthly marchings, ever callest thy select champion from the kingly commons, bear me out in it, O God, asking God to bear him out, even if he may raise these people up so high, but that very light that he sees within them does he see come from God, this democratic spirit which is in each individual, and gives them a dignity which they cannot take away, and so they are noble in and of themselves. God gives that to them. And God gives them that dignity which cannot be stripped away, even the fact that they are in a low profession. So, but prior to talking about Ahab's nobility, I think it's first important to talk about, and which really kind of drives the story forward, there definitely is a plot to Moby Dick and a conflict at the heart of it, but it's interspersed with chapters on scientific understandings of the whale, systematizing of the whale, and experiences of the whale, such as the lowerings, and which they try to go and hunt down whales, and different kind of stories from ships that they encounter in order to capture the grandness of the whale. And so you can see that Melville is trying to build up the whale as this massive project that's not just a set of bones or a abstract idea kind of in the sky. It is both a body of knowledge that you can look at scientifically, and it's something that you experience its power subjectively, and by neither of them alone, the scientific knowledge nor the subjective knowledge, fully encapsulates what the whale is, but together you can begin to understand the greatness of the whale, right? So I have a couple different sections on this. Firstly, the Catology chapter on page 116, chapter 32, which this is a used copy. It's a skip. I'm gonna cross that out here eventually, but I think it is traditionally skipped. But why would you skip something in Moby Dick? It's blasphemy. But it's interesting here, right? So you can see, and I talked about this a little earlier, there's a feeling of desperateness, of a need to be, for this profession to be understood. So listen to this the beginning of this chapter. Already we are boldly launched upon the deep, but soon we shall be lost in its unshored, harborless immensities. Ere that come to pass, ere the Pequod's weedy hull rolls side by side with the barnacled hulls of the Leviathan, at the outset it is but well to attend to a matter almost indispensable to a thorough appreciative understanding of the special Leviathanic revelations and allusions of all specials which are to follow, of all sorts which are to follow, excuse me. It is some systematized exhibition of the whale in his broad genera that I would now feign before you. Yet it is no easy task. The classification of the constituents of the chaos, nothing less is here essayed. Listen to what the best and latest authorities have laid down for you. And then he goes through and he talks about different types of different attempts at cetology, the study of whaling that have been done so far. A couple quotes that he brings in. No branch of zoology is so much involved as that which is entitled cetology. It says Captain Scoresby, A.D. 1820. It is not my intention, were it in my power, to enter into the inquiry as the true method of dividing the etc. into groups and families. Utter confusion exists among the historians of this whale, this animal, sperm whale, specifically A.D. 1839. So here, and this is the part that I want to emphasize, Ishmael goes into detail and really narrows down what he wants to accomplish in this cetology. Of the names in this list of whale authors, only those following Owen, a systematizer, a scientist, ever saw living whales. But one of them was a real professional harpooner and whaleman. Captain Scoresby. On the separate subject of the Greenland or right whale, he's the best existing authority. But Scoresby knew nothing and says nothing of the great sperm whale, compared with which the Greenland whale is almost unworthy mentioning. And here be it said that the Greenland whale is a usurper upon the thrones of the sea. He is not even by any means the largest of the whales, yet owing to the long priority of his claims and the profound ignorance which till 70 years back invested the then fabulous or utterly unknown sperm whale, on which ignorance to this present day still reigns in all but some few scientific retreats and whale ports, this usurpation has been every way complete. Reference to nearly all the Leviathanic allusions in the greatest poets of days past will satisfy you that the Greenland whale, without one rival, was to them the monarch of the seas. But the time has at last come for a new proclamation. This is the Charing Cross. Hear ye, good people all. Let me redo that. This is Charing Cross. Hear ye, good people all. The Greenland whale is deposed. The great sperm whale now reigneth. Right, what a proclamation. So he's trying to reclassify and re-systematize all these different whales and put them in their proper order, so that they can gain their so that they can be properly understood, right? And so that especially that sperm whale can be shown to be the greatest one. And so he goes on and he talks about building the systematization of cetology. And then he talks about how difficult of a task it is. And this part is, I think, interesting and worth thinking about. But it is a ponderous task. No ordinary letter sorter in the postman office is equal to it. To grope down to the bottom of the sea after them, to have one's hands among the unspeakable foundations, ribs, and very pelvis of the world, this is a fearful thing. What am I that I should essay to hook the nose of this Leviathan? The awful tauntings in Job might well appall me. Will he, Leviathan, make a covenant with thee? Behold, the hope of him is vain. But I have swam through the libraries and sailed through oceans. I have had to do with whales with these visible hands. I am in earnest, and I will try. There are some preliminaries to settle. He goes through the preliminaries. But, he's very clear. You talk about equal dignity, right? Given to the professions, the people in whaling. He's not only giving dignity to the whaling profession as a whole, but also like the scholarly pursuit of whaling. So I think it's really, really cool. Yeah. So continuing on with this, so all this is the catology ends with the so he puts all these together, goes through the narwhal, goes through the sperm whale, the greenback, and names the sperm whale, like he talked about at the beginning, as the largest whale. But so you have this, like I said, this body of knowledge that he obviously gives a deal of dignity to, that I just talked about. But he also furnishes the world with the whales in order to help you understand the importance of whaling to the people in the community of Nantucket, and the whalers in large, but also to help you understand the immensity of this thing. So there's a scene very early on, it's like on the 11th page on the Spouter Inn, where he's walking into, Ishmael's walking into the inn that he's going to meet Queequeg at. He talks about this bar that he sees, right? And he sees a whale jaw around it. It's very cool. So here it is. Yeah, let's start right here. Projecting from the further angle of the room stands a dark-looking den, the bar, a rude attempt at a right whale's head. Be that how it may, there stands the vast arched bone of the whale's jaw, so wide a coach might almost drive through beneath it. Within are shabby shelves arranged round with old decanters, bottles, flasks, and in those jaws of swift destruction, like another accursed Jonah, by which names indeed they called him, bustles a little withered old man who, for their money, dearly sells the sailors' deliriums and death. This vast arched bone of the whale's jaw that carriage is able to draw through. And so, obviously, I gave you a catology chapter later, that comes later in the book, and I just talked about that. This subjective experience of the whale's jaw immediately upon entering into the book. I think it's no coincidence that Ishmael is entering into the hotel that's going to start out kind of his adventure, and seeing this jaw, right? And he really would have struck him with the enormity of this animal, and should strike us with the enormity of this animal, and gain us some more, help us to grow in the subjective knowledge of this and imaginative knowledge of this beast, right? So we do that. Where there are a lot of different things like that, where Melville helps us to kind of understand what the subjective, this imaginative knowledge, gain an imaginative knowledge through understanding the enormity of this thing, right? Another case in which he gives us imaginative knowledge is through, maybe we'll talk about the whiteness of the whale first, and then we'll go on to the first lowering, because this is a musing on the whiteness of the whale, right? And he puts it, and he's like thinking about looking at the whale. So we've talked about looking at the whale from a scientific perspective. We've talked about looking at it from like an imaginative perspective, as just looking at the jaw, right? And realizing how enormous this thing is, which you don't really get as much when you're just reading facts on a page, right? But here, he's thinking about this as like an aesthetic experience, looking at the whale, and which leads him to contemplate, to have spiritual musings, anyway. And so, yeah, this whole thing is about the whiteness of the whale. And so I think I'm just going to read through. It's a little bit of a long passage, but this last part is just so great. The end of the whiteness of the whale. It's in chapter 42. But not yet have we solved the incantation of this whiteness and learned why it appeals with such power to the soul and most strange and far more portentous. Why, as we have seen, it is at once the most meaning symbol of spiritual things, nay, the very veil of the Christian's deity, and yet should be, as it is, the intensifying agent in things the most appalling to mankind. Is it that by its indefiniteness, it shadows forth the heartless voids and immensities of the universe, and thus stabs us from behind with the thought of annihilation, when beholding the white depths of the Milky Way? Or is it that, as in essence, whiteness is not so much a color as the visible absence of color, and at the same time the concrete of all colors? Is it for these reasons that there is such a dumb blankness, full of meaning, in a wide landscape this knows, a colorless all color of atheism from which we sink? And when we consider that other theory of the natural philosophers, that all other earthly hues, every stately or lovely emblazing, the sweet tinges of sunset skies and woods, yea, and the gilded velvets of butterflies, and the butterfly cheeks of young girls, all these are but subtle deceits, not actually inherent in substance, not only laid on from without, so that all deified nature absolutely paints like the harlot, whose allurements cover nothing but the charnel house within. And when we proceed further and consider the mystical cosmetic which produces every one of her hues, the great principle of light forever remains white or colorless in itself, and if operating without medium upon matter, would touch all objects, even tulips and roses, with its own blank tinge. Pondering all this, the palsied universe lies before us a leper, and like willful travelers in Lapland, who refuse to wear colored and coloring glasses upon their eyes, so the wretched infidel gazes himself blind at the monumental white shroud that wraps all the prospect around him. And of all these things, the albino whale was the symbol. Wonder ye then at the fairy hunt. So it's like all of these things that have color are but a veil, but the whale, full of meaning. We get at something like the essence of something with the, Melville seems to think, and Ishmael, I should say, the essence of the universe, which both signals meaningfulness, full of meaning, he says, but also like meaninglessness, like this thought of annihilation of the self when beholding just so it also signals not just heartless voids, but also immensities, right? So these both extremes are captured in this whiteness that you see when you see the whale off at sea. Wonder ye then at the fairy hunt. It's a man that's trying to really show you why he loves the hunt. Right? So going in after that, if we gain this imaginative knowledge and we're searching for he's trying to not just use to not just go whaling, but show the dignity in it, to show give us an imaginative knowledge of the immensity of this thing, and also like this suggestion that the way the aesthetic experience of the whale can get a spiritual knowledge. He then talks about the first lowering, and there are other stories before this, but this, I think, helps us to understand the power of the whale, right? So as he's going on, this is, like I said, the first lowering, but they're all down, and they're in separate boats off the Pequod and trying to hook the whale. There's a whale that they saw at sea, and so all the mates and Ahab are down there trying to do this. And so you can see the intensity of. I want to read the passage and show you guys the intensity with which this is done. But what it specifically focusing on Ahab, I think. But what it was that inscrutable Ahab said to that tiger yellow crew of his, these were words best omitted here, for you live under the blessed light of the evangelical land. Only the infidel sharks and the audacious seas may give ear to such words, when with torpedo brow and eyes of red murder and foam-glued lips, Ahab leaped after his prey. Meanwhile, all the boats tore on. The repeated specific allusions of Flask to that whale, as he called the fictitious monster, which he declared to be incessantly tantalizing his boat's bow with its tail. These allusions of his were at times so vivid and lifelike that they would cause one or two of his men to snatch a fearful look over his shoulder. But this was against all rule, for the oarsmen must put out their eyes and ram a skewer through their necks, usage pronouncing that they may have no organs but ears and no limbs but arms in these critical moments. It was a sight full quick wonder and awe. The vast swells of the omnipotent sea, the surging, hollow roar that they made as they rolled along the eight-gun whales like gigantic bowls in a boundless bowling green. The brief suspended agony of the boat as it would tip for an instant on the knife-like edge of the sharper waves that almost seemed threatening to cut it in two. The sudden profound dip into the watery glens and hollows, the keen spurrings and goadings to gain the top of the opposite hill, the headlong sled like slide down in its other side. All these, the cries of the headsmen and harpooneers and the shuddering gasps of the oarsmen with the wondrous sight of the ivory Pequod bearing down upon her boats with the outstretched sails like a wild hen after her screaming brood. All this was thrilling. Now not the raw recruit, marching from the bosom of his wife into the fever heat of his first battle. Not the dead man's ghost encountering the first unknown phantom in the other world. Neither of these can feel stranger and stronger emotions than that man does, who for the first time finds himself pulling into the charm-churned circle of the hunted sperm whale. Yeah. And then here they capture it. The dancing white water made by the chase was now becoming more and more visible, owing to the increasing darkness of the dun cloud shadows flung upon the sea. The jets of vapor no longer blended, but tilted everywhere to right and left. The whales seemed separating their wakes. The boats were pulled more apart, Starbuck giving chase to 3 whales running dead leeward. Our sail was now set, and with the still rising wind, we rushed along, the boats going with such madness through the water that the lee oars could scarcely be worked rapidly enough to escape being torn from the row locks. And then Starbuck whispers, okay, yeah, and then Starbuck sees this hump. That's his hump. There, give it to him. A short rushing sound leaped out of the boat. It was a darted iron and queequeg. Then all in one welded commotion gave an invisible push from astern. While forward the boat seemed striking on a ledge, the sail collapsed and exploded. A gush of scalding vapor shot up nearby us. Something rolled tumbled like an earthquake beneath us. The whole crew were half suffocated as they were tossed helter-skelter into the white curdling cream of the squall. Squall, whale, and harpoon had all blended together. The whale, merely grazed by the iron, escaped. Though swamped, the boat was nearly unharmed. So in this instance, the whale gets away. But you can see here, we've had several types of knowledge, right? We've had the scientific knowledge. We've had the imaginative knowledge of the immensity of this whale's jaw. We've had the imaginative knowledge of through an experience, an aesthetic experience of just looking at the whiteness of the whale, and it gives us some insight into spiritual workings. But also, this imaginative, Ishmael seems to suggest that we have gained imaginative knowledge of the whale just by the hunt, right? The pure experience, going from the Latin word experio, which is like going through, right? You can only have knowledge of this if you go through the hunt for the whale, right? In no other instance would you be able to feel its power. You're not going to experience this power when you're just laying dead and you're trying to dissect it. You're going to gain the knowledge of its power by trying to hunt it and pushing it to the most extreme. So the final thing I want to do is I'm going to transition from talking about the whale and whaling in general to Ahab. And I think a good transition is talking about the whalebone, which is directly connects Ahab and the whale because they have a very close relation, clearly, because he has a false leg. He lost his, and we'll talk about why he lost his leg, but he has a whalebone as a, actually let's start a little bit earlier. Yeah, we'll start a little bit earlier. So Ahab, first time we hear about Ahab, and the reason why I started a little bit earlier, is from a prophet, a person that comes up to Ishmael and Queequeg as they're going up to the Pequod, the ship, called Elijah, right, which is a prophet in the Bible, and it's clearly referenced by Melville in this chapter entitled "The Prophet," right? But here we get the first instance of the legend of Ahab and what's kind of known about him. So we just hear he's just called the stranger right away. And so this is at the beginning of the chapter 19 of the prophet. "Stop," cried the stranger. "Yea, said true, ye haven't seen old thunder yet, have ye?" "Who's old thunder?" said I. This is Ishmael narrating, right? Again, riveted with the insane earnestness of his manner. "Captain Ahab." "What's the captain of our ship? The Pequod?" "What? The captain of our ship? The Pequod?" "Aye, among some of us old sailor chaps he goes by that name. You haven't seen him yet, have ye?" "No, we haven't. He's sick, they say, but is getting better and will be all right before long." "All right again before long," laughed the sailor with a solemnly derisive sort of laugh. "Look you, when Captain Ahab is all right, then this left arm of mine will be all right, not before. What do you know about him? What did they tell you about him?" "Say that. They didn't tell much of anything about him, only I've heard that he's a good whale hunter and a good captain of his crew." "That's true, that's true." "Yes, both true enough, but you must jump when he gives an order. Step and growl, growl and go. That's the word with Ahab. But nothing about that thing that happened to him off Cape Horn long ago, when he lay like dead for 3 days and nights. Nothing about that deadly scrimmage with the Spaniard before the altar in Santa. Heard nothing about that, eh? Nothing about the silver calabash he spat into, and nothing about his losing his leg last voyage, according to the prophecy. Didn't ye hear a word about them matters and something more, eh?" "No, I didn't think you did. How could you?" who knows it? Not all Nantucket, I guess. But howsoever may have, ye've heard tell about the leg and how he lost it. I have heard of that, I dare say. Oh yes, that everyone knows almost. I mean, they know he's only one leg, and that a Parmachidi took the other off. Anyway, Ishmael calls him. Says that he's saying gibberish, and then he asks him his name later. He says Elijah, and he says Elijah, thought I, and walked away, talking about the rugged old sailor. But he continues to ruminate on the words of him, right? So here, this circumstance coupled the circumstance of like walking into the quad, right? And this old man following him, coupled with with Elijah's ambiguous, half-hinting and half-revealing, shadowed sort of talk, now begat in me all kinds of vague wonderments and half-apprehensions, and all connected with the quad and Captain Ahab, and the leg he had lost, and the Cape Horn fit, the silver calabash, and what Captain Peleg had said of him when I left the ship the day previous, the prediction of the squaw Tistig, and the voyage we had had bound ourselves to sail, and 100 other shadowy things. So before he has these, before he even goes on the quad, he has this idea of what it's going to be. We'll see if it matches up or not. But the idea is Elijah is trying to present him with this knowledge. We gain this legend about Ahab before we actually see Ahab, which is actually a very Shakespearean technique. Anytime, and this a majority of the time, I think you'd be probably hard pressed to find an important character in Shakespeare that isn't introduced first by another character and isn't talked about by another character, so that we gain an understanding of his reputation first before we meet the main character, right? So we hear about Romeo, what Romeo's been doing. He's been off sighing and everything like that before we actually see him and his sighs and can make our own judgment, right? So this is literally the same thing that's happening here. So Elijah here is trying to give Ishmael some sort of imaginative knowledge, and he has all this vague apprehensions of what it might be, what Ahab might be, before he actually meets him. But he knows now that this is not going to be any ordinary man, and surely he won't. So very quickly he finds out about his leg, right? And he's told this by Stubb, one of the mates. Who was telling him, Stubbs talking to Flask, and Stubbs talking about a dream that he had, that he was kicked with the old man's ivory leg, and that's when Ishmael says, "Why, thinks I, what's the row? It's not a real leg, only a false one. And there's a mighty difference between a living thump and a dead thump. That's what makes a blow from the hand flask 50 times more savage to bear than a blow from a cane. The living member that makes the living insult my little man. And thinks I to myself all the while, mind what? While I was stubbing my silly, Yeah, so he's talking about this dream. So it's in this Queen Mab. Let me back up. It's in this Queen Mab speech that we hear, that we've learned. It's in this Queen Mab chapter, chapter 31, in which Stubb is describing a dream that he had to Flask. And I'm just going to summarize it and not go into real detail, in which we learn that Ahab has this whalebone leg, right? And he's essentially trying to justify that, getting kicked by a whale leg and a false leg is better than getting kicked by a real one. But it's still, it really emphasizes like the enormity of Ahab over their imaginations. You also then, so this builds up Ahab as, like I said, a character in in the novel and also in the minds of each of the characters. You also have, this a little bit earlier, the Ahab's scar, right? And this is a chapter called Ahab, chapter 28, which is right after the Knights and Squires chapter that I talked about earlier, where Ishmael is kind of giving a summary of knowledge about Ahab that he learned presumably after the fact. But well, right here, this is the observations that he's making as he's meeting him, right? But it's a body of knowledge that he can kind of understand right away. So here we get his observations about the scar, but it's going to start with observations of his physical appearance overall. There seemed no sign of common bodily illness about him, nor the recovery from any. He looked like a man cut away from the stake when the fire has overrunningly wasted all the limbs without consuming them or taking away one particle from their compacted age robustness. His whole high, broad form seemed made of solid bronze and shaped in an unalterable mold like Cellini's cast Perseus. Threading its way out from among his gray hairs and continuous right down one side of his tawny, scorched face and neck till it disappeared in his clothing, you saw a slender rod mark, lividly whitish. It resembled that perpendicular seam sometimes made in the straight, lofty trunk of a great tree, when the upper lightning tearingly darts through it, and without wrenching a single twig, peels and grooves out the bark from top to bottom, air running off into the soil, leaving the tree with still green alive but branded. Whether the mark was born with him, or whether it was the scar left by some desperate wound, no one would say. By some tacit consent, throughout the voyage, little or no allusion was made by it, especially that mace. But once Tashiko Sr., an old gay-head Indian among the crew, superstitiously asserted that not till he was full 40 years old did Ahab become that way branded, and then it came upon him not in the fury of any moral fray, but an elemental strife at sea. Yet this wild hint seemed inferentially negatified by what a great Manxman insinuated, an old sepulchral man, who, having never before sailed out in Nantucket, had never ere this laid eye upon wild Ahab. Nevertheless, the old sea traditions, the immoral credulities, properly invested this old Manxman with preternatural powers of discernment, so that no white sailor seriously contradicted him when he said that if ever Captain Airhead should be tranquilly laid out, which might hardly come to pass, so he muttered, then whoever should do the last office for the dead would find a birthmark on him from crown to sole, right? So it becomes a legend. And so also it's interesting too, you see these different bodies of knowledge about one given thing grow up, right? So Tashiko Sr. has one understanding of where Ahab's scar might have came, but then this other man, an old Manxman, has another knowledge. So Ishmael is trying to discern, right, what is right, and ultimately he ends up just kind of giving that this building up into this character, which is Ahab, right? But then eventually we get Ahab telling us himself, right? So in the chapter on the quarterdeck, after I've just set up this enormous man who is in stature, who is Ahab, in the chapter called the quarterdeck, chapter 36, we get to start understanding his quest for the white whale, right? Moby Dick. And this starts when he takes out a coin and bangs it onto the ship, and he says, "Whoever of ye raises me a white whale, white-headed whale with a wrinkled brow and a crooked jaw, whoever of ye raises me that white-headed whale with 3 holes punctured in his starboard fluke, look you, whosoever of ye raises me that same white whale, ye shall have this good gold ounce, my boys. Huzzah, huzzah, cried the seamen, as with swinging charltons they hailed the act of nailing the gold to the mast. It's a white whale, I say, resumed Ahab as he threw down the top maul. A white whale, skin your eyes for him, men. Look sharp for white water. If you see but a bubble, sing out. So now they're going through, and Tashchigo says, Captain Ahab, that white whale must be the same that some call Moby Dick. Moby Dick, shouted Ahab. Do you know the white whale then, Tash? Does he fantail of a little curious, sir, before he goes down, said the gay-header deliberately. And has he a curious spout, too, said Dagu. Very bushy even for a paramachete, and mighty quick, Captain Ahab. And he have 1, 2, 3, all good many iron in him too, Captain, cried Queequeg disjointedly. All twisky betwisk, like him, faltering hard for a word, and screwing his hand round and round as though uncorking a little bottle, like him, corkscrew, cried Ahab. Aye, Queequeg. The harpoons lie all twisted and wrenched in him, aye. Dagu, his spout is a big one, like a whole shock of wheat, and white as a pile of our Nantucket wool after the great annual sheep shearing. Aye, Tashchigo, and he fantails like a spit jib in a squall. Death and devil's men, it is Moby Dick ye have seen. Moby Dick, Moby Dick. Captain Ahab, said Starbuck, who with Stubb and Flask had thus far been eyeing his superior with increasing surprise, but at last seemed struck with a thought which somewhat explained all the wonder. Captain Ahab, I have heard of Moby Dick, but was it not Moby Dick that took off thy leg? Who told thee that? Cried Ahab, then pausing. I, Starbuck, I. My heart is all round. It was Moby Dick that dismasted me. Moby Dick that brought me to this dead stump I stand on now. I. He shouted with a terrific, loud animal sob like that of a heart-stricken moose. I. It was that accursed white whale that received me, made a poor pegging lubber of me forever and a day. Then, tossing both arms with measureless imprecations, he shouted out, I, and I'll chase him round Good Hope, and round the Horn, and round the Northway maelstrom, and round perdition's flames before I give him up. And this is what ye have shipped for, men, to chase that white whale on both sides of land, and all over all sides of earth, till he spouts black blood and rolls fin out. What say ye, men? Will ye slice hands on it now? I think you do look brave. Aye, harpooneers. A sharp eye for the white whale, a sharp lance for Moby Dick. God bless ye, he seemed his heart half sob, and half shout, God bless ye, men. Seward, go draw the great measure of grog. What's this long face about, Mr. Starbuck? Wilt thou not chase the white whale? Art not game for Moby Dick? I am game for his crooked jaw, and for the jaws of death too, Captain Ahab, if it fairly comes in the way of the business we follow. But I came here to hunt whales, not my commander's vengeance. How many barrels will thy vengeance yield be, even if thou gettest it, Captain Ahab? It will not fetch thee much in our Nantucket market. Nantucket market? Hoot! But come closer, Starbuck. Thou requirest a little lower layer. If money's to be the measure, man, and the accountants have computed their great counting house, the globe, by girdling it with guineas, 1 to every 3 parts, then let me tell thee that my vengeance will fetch a great pyramid here. He smites his chest, Mr. Stubb. What's that? So when he's that my vengeance will fetch a great pyramid here. He smites his chest, whispered Stubb. What's that for? Methinks it rings most mass, but hollow. A vengeance on the dumb brute, cried Starbuck. That simply smote thee from blindest instinct. Madness to be enraged with a dumb thing, Captain Ahab, seems blasphemous. Hark ye again, the little lower layer. This is Ahab talking. Listen to this. All visible objects, man, are but as pasteboard mass, but in each event, in the living act, the undoubted deed, there's some unknown but still a reasoning thing, puts forth the moldings of its features from behind the unreasoning math. If a man will strike through the mask. How can the prisoner reach outside except by thrusting through the wall? To me, the white whale is that wall. Shoved near it to me, sometimes I think there's not beyond. But 'tis enough. He tasks me, he heaps me. I see in him an outrageous strength, with an inscrutable malice, insinuating in it. That inscrutable thing is chiefly what I hate, and be the white whale agent, or be the white whale principal, I will wreak that hate upon him. Talk not of blasphemy, man. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me. For could the sun do that, then could I do the other. Since there is ever a sort of fair play herein, jealousy presiding over all creations, but not my master man is even that fair play. Who's over me? Truth has no confines. Take off thine eye, more intolerable than fiends glaring in a dolcish stare. So thou reddenest pale. My heat has melted thee to anger below. Glow. But look ye, Starbuck, what is said in heat that things unsays itself. There are men from whom warm words of small indignity. I meant not to incense thee. Look, let it go, look. See yonder Turkish chiefs, the spotted Tom, living, breathing pictures painted by the sun. The pagan leopards, the reeking and worshipping things that live and seek and give no reason for the torrid life they feel. The crew, man, the crew. Are they not one and all with Ahab in this matter of the whale? See Stub, he laughs. See yonder Chilean, he snorts to think of it. Stand up among the general hurricane, thy one stapling cannot, Starbuck, and what is it? Reckon it. 'Tis but to help strike a fin, no hunt. Then no wondrous feat for Starbuck. What is it more? From this one poor hunt, then, the best lance of all Nantucket, surely, the best lance out of all Nantucket, surely he will not hang back. When every foremast hand has clutched a whetstone. Constraining sees thee, I see. The billows lift thee. Speak but speak. I. Thy silence then, that's silent. That voices thee. And then a sigh. Something shot from my dilated nostrils. He has inhaled into his lungs. Starbuck now is mine, cannot oppose me now without rebellion. And the Starbuck murmurs, God help keep me, God keep us all. So Ahab is mad with fury for hunting this whale. And he sees this not just as a whale, but as everything that has wronged him. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me, right? And then not only that, but this part here, all visible objects, man, are but as pasteboard mass. But in each event, some unknown, still unreasoning thing, some reasoning thing behind that mask puts forth the molding of his features on that mask, right? And so if you're going to commit a true action, he said, if a man will strike through the mask, right? And so to me, he says, the white whale is that wall, shoved near enough to me. So to strike the whale is to get at the heart of reality itself and rip the very fabric of it and get into the essence, right? And we find out later, and I think I'm not going to go into this because I want to end this here real quick. But the whale, when Ahab his leg was taken by Moby Dick, he went into kind of a fever and a sickness for a while, and then he came out of it with this madness, and it says, I guess I will read this part. All that madness, most madness and torments, all that stirs up the lees of things, all truth with malice in it, all that cracks the sinews and cakes the brain, all the subtle demonisms of life and thought, all evil to crazy Ahab were visibly and personified and made practically assailable in Moby Dick. He piled upon the white whale's hump the sum of all the general rage and hate, felt by his whole race from Adam down, and then as if his chest had been a mortar, he struck his hot heart's shell upon it. No wonder then this man hates Moby Dick. It is the sum of all evil for him, right? And to strike him is to get at the heart of reality itself. This whole book, and what I think is so brilliant about it is he starts, Melville and Ishmael, and our narrator, starts by trying to justify, right, this very low profession. And it kind of starts really humbly, right? The first line of the novel is, call me Ishmael. But Melville initially build up this body of knowledge to dignify the profession and help us to get a frame of reference for what he's even talking about, right? Through, as I talked about, the ecology chapter with some scientific observations, giving us an imaginative understanding of the whale through that arch, that gigantic whale, jaw, which he signals as, imagines as an arch that a carriage could drive through the experience with the power of the whale, through the aesthetic experience, the whiteness of the whale, which causes him to have spiritual musings. And then it's only by doing that that he's able to then to show us, to present with Shakespearean nobility. Well, let me back up. It's only by building up this body of knowledge that that Melville is able to give Ahab, and it's only by giving this body of knowledge and then dignifying the characters and giving them this nobility, that he is able to present this noble and ultimately tragic hero for this tale, that is trying to take revenge on everything that has wronged him, whether he's right or not. Ahab is trying to strike at reality itself. And that's really, I think, honestly, what Melville is trying to do in this whole book. He's trying to show us all these different types of knowledge, and he's trying to strike by doing that and approaching this body of this one subject in a variety of different ways. He tries to strike at reality itself. And it's part of the search for truth, right? It's part of us coming out of the cave and looking at the light, right? But it is this, you could feel Ahab's desire for striking at the heart of reality. I feel like the form of this novel from Melville and our narrator attempt to understand and convey to us the knowledge of the whale and the whaling industry by giving us a variety of forms of knowledge, as well as dignifying his characters, ultimately the tragic hero. This has been Burley's Books, and I thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe and like this video, which I would really appreciate that to help this channel. Have a great day.